My wife came home with a promotion and a nervous smile. Her boss walked in behind her and said, "She deserved it. She's been very committed." I handed him a glass and said, "I agree. I've watched the office cameras. Want a copy of the clip?" The whiskey tumbler froze halfway to Kyle Mercer's lips. His predatory smirk vanished like smoke in a hurricane. My wife Sarah's face went white as Maine snow in January, and I knew right then that my suspicions weren't just paranoid delusions from a marriage hitting rough waters. "Jack," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the grandfather clock ticking in our living room, "what are you talking about?" I'd been Jack Harlan for 38 years, fixing computers and networks for half the businesses in this godforsaken town of Millfield. When you spend your days pulling data from corrupted hard drives and recovering deleted files, you develop a certain appreciation for the truth that people try so desperately to hide. You also learn that everything leaves a digital footprint, even the things people think they've erased forever. Kyle set the glass down on my coffee table without taking a sip. He was one of those corporate parasites who wore $1,000 suits and thought his MBA made him untouchable. Vice President of Operations at TechFlow Solutions, the biggest employer in town after the paper mill closed down. Sarah had been working there for 3 years, climbing the ladder one rung at a time until tonight's sudden promotion to operations manager. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Kyle said, his voice steady but his hands betraying him with a slight tremor. "Sarah's promotion was based entirely on merit. Her quarterly reports have been exceptional, and her vendor management skills are exactly what we need in senior leadership." I laughed, the sound harsh in the suddenly tense room. "Vendor management. Is that what we're calling it now?" Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached for her purse. I'd noticed those hands during dinner, how they trembled when she talked about her new responsibilities, how she kept checking her phone every few minutes like she was expecting bad news. The woman I'd married 15 years ago had steady hands. She could thread a needle in dim light or calm our daughter Maya during her worst nightmares without so much as a quiver. "Kyle, maybe you should go," Sarah said, still not meeting my eyes. "We can discuss the transition details tomorrow." But Kyle wasn't moving. He was studying me like I was a puzzle he needed to solve, probably trying to figure out how much I actually knew versus how much I was guessing. Corporate predators like him didn't survive by running at the first sign of trouble. They survived by calculating risks and eliminating threats. "Actually, Jack," he said, settling back into my armchair like he owned the place, "I'd like to clear the air here. What exactly do you think you saw on these alleged office cameras?" The balls on this guy. He was calling my bluff right in my own living room, in front of my wife, betting that I was just a suspicious husband throwing around accusations. He didn't know that I'd installed the security system at TechFlow 2 years ago when they upgraded their network infrastructure. He didn't know that I'd kept administrative access to troubleshoot issues. And he definitely didn't know that I'd been monitoring the system for the past 3 weeks, ever since Sarah started working late every Tuesday and Thursday. "I saw enough," I said, walking to my home office and returning with a tablet. "Tuesday, October 3rd, Conference Room B, you and Sarah discussing her performance metrics for 47 minutes after everyone else went home. Very hands-on performance review, Kyle." Sarah's face crumpled. Not guilt, I realized, but something worse. Fear. Pure animal terror that made my chest tighten with a rage I'd never felt before. This wasn't an affair. This was something darker. "The cameras in the conference rooms only record video, not audio," Kyle said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "Whatever you think you saw—" "You're right about the audio," I interrupted. "But you know what's funny about people who think they're smarter than everyone else? They get careless. Sarah's laptop was recording the whole time, automatic backup to the cloud. Company policy, remember? You signed off on it." That was a lie. I had no audio recordings. But Kyle's face told me everything I needed to know. The color drained from his cheeks, and his eyes darted to Sarah with something between panic and calculation. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need some air. This is too much." She headed for the back door, and Kyle started to follow her. I stepped into his path, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. "She goes alone," I said quietly. "You and I need to finish our conversation." For a moment, I thought he might try to push past me. Kyle was taller than my 5'10" frame, but I'd spent 20 years hauling server equipment and wrestling with industrial network installations. My hands were scarred from 1,000 small cuts and burns, and my shoulders were broad from real work, not gym posturing. "Listen, Jack," Kyle said, his voice taking on a reasonable, almost friendly tone. "I think you're misinterpreting what you saw. Sarah's been under a lot of pressure lately, and—" "Stop talking." I walked to the window overlooking our backyard, where Sarah was pacing near the old oak tree, her phone pressed to her ear. You want to know what I really saw on those cameras, Kyle? I saw my wife's hands shaking every time you walked into a room. I saw her checking the locks on her office door. I saw her working late not because she wanted to, but because you scheduled performance reviews that weren't on the company calendar. I turned back to face him, and whatever he saw in my expression made him take a step backward. I saw a predator, I continued, and I saw my wife trying to survive. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of my house, get in your Tesla, and drive away. Then you're going to think very carefully about what kind of man you want to be tomorrow morning. Kyle straightened his tie, a gesture that probably made him feel more in control. You're making a serious mistake, Jack. Sarah's promotion is legitimate, and any suggestion otherwise could be considered defamation. I have lawyers. I have evidence, I cut him off, and I have nothing left to lose. Do you? He stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's not. After Kyle left, I found Sarah still in the backyard, sitting on the wooden swing I'd built when Maya was little. She wasn't crying, which somehow made it worse. She was just staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. How long? I asked, settling onto the swing beside her. 6 months, she whispered. It started small. Comments about my appearance, questions about our marriage, suggestions that I could advance faster if I was more flexible. The swing creaked as I processed this. 6 months of my wife living in fear while I worried about quarterly tax payments and whether Maya was spending too much time on her phone. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah finally looked at me, and I saw 15 years of marriage in her eyes. The good times and the fights, the dreams we'd shared and the ones we'd given up, the comfortable routine that had somehow become a wall between us. Because I was afraid you'd do exactly what you just did, she said. Kyle isn't just my boss, Jack. He controls everything at TechFlow. The contracts, the vendor relationships, the personnel decisions. If he wanted to destroy me professionally, he could do it with a phone call. And if he wanted to destroy you personally? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, he said he had photos from the company Christmas party last year when I had too much wine and fell asleep in the break room. He said they looked compromising. My hands clenched into fists. Blackmail. I thought I could handle it, Sarah continued. Just keep my head down, do good work, wait for him to get bored, and move on to someone else. But then he started demanding more time, more private meetings. And when I tried to pull back, he reminded me about Maya's college fund, about your business loan, about everything we could lose. I understood now why she'd been so distant lately, why she'd stopped talking about work, why she'd flinched when I touched her shoulder. She'd been carrying this alone, trying to protect our family the only way she knew how. The promotion, I said. What did he want for it? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. A weekend business trip to Portland, just the two of us, to discuss my new responsibilities. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. This wasn't just harassment or even blackmail. This was systematic predation, and my wife was the latest target in what I was beginning to suspect was a long line of victims. We're going to stop him, I said. Jack, you don't understand. He has connections everywhere. The mayor, the city council, half the business owners in town, and if this gets out, if people think I was complicit, well, they won't think that, I interrupted, because we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Kyle Mercer really is. Sarah turned to face me fully. What are you talking about? I stood up, my mind already racing through possibilities. 20 years of fixing other people's computer problems had taught me that every system has vulnerabilities. Every network has weak points. And every predator leaves a trail, no matter how careful they think they're being. I'm talking about fighting back, I said. I'm talking about using every skill I've learned, every contact I've made, every favor I'm owed to burn his world down around him. That's not who you are, Jack. She was right. I'd always been the steady one, the problem solver, the guy who fixed things quietly and went home to dinner. But looking at my wife's haunted expression, I realized that maybe it was time to become someone else. It's who I need to be, I said. For you, for Maya. For every other woman he's done this to. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? The next morning, I called in sick to my scheduled repair jobs and drove to my workshop downtown. The building had been a hardware store back when Millfield still had a main street worth visiting, but I'd converted it into a combination repair shop and digital forensics lab. Most of my clients thought I just fixed broken computers and installed Wi-Fi networks. They didn't know about the other side of my business, The divorce lawyers who needed deleted files recovered, the insurance companies investigating fraud, the occasional private investigator who required someone with my particular skill set. I'd been building this capability for years, partly out of professional curiosity and partly because I'd learned that information was the most valuable currency in a small town. Every hard drive told a story, every network held secrets, and every deleted file was just waiting for someone with the right tools to bring it back to life. The first step was mapping Kyle's digital footprint. I started with public records, property ownership, business licenses, court filings. Kyle Mercer owned a condo downtown worth $300,000, drove a Tesla Model S, and had been divorced twice. His ex-wives had both received generous settlements, which was interesting. Men who paid big money to make problems disappear usually had big problems to hide. Next, I moved to social media. Kyle's LinkedIn profile was a masterpiece of corporate speak, full of buzzwords about synergistic leadership and optimizing human capital. His Facebook was more revealing, photos from expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Boston and New York, always with different women who looked young enough to be his daughters. The comments were telling too. Lots of female TechFlow employees liking his posts, but something felt forced about their interactions. Too enthusiastic, too frequent, like they were performing for an audience. But the real treasure was in his professional digital trail. As someone who'd installed and maintained TechFlow's network infrastructure, I knew their systems better than most of their own IT staff. I'd kept administrative credentials for troubleshooting purposes, which was standard practice in my industry. What wasn't standard was using those credentials to dig into employee records and email archives. I started with Kyle's calendar history. The pattern was immediately obvious once you knew what to look for. Regular performance review meetings with female employees, always scheduled after hours, always in conference rooms without windows. The meetings averaged 45 minutes, and they were never logged in the official HR system. Then I cross-referenced those dates with personnel actions. Every woman who'd had multiple performance reviews with Kyle had received either a promotion or a transfer within 60 days. The promotions came with salary increases and better titles. The transfers were lateral moves to different departments, often with vague explanations about restructuring or optimizing workflow. I pulled up the employee records for the women who'd been transferred. Jennifer Walsh, former accounts payable manager, now working in the Portland office. Lisa Chen, former marketing coordinator, now at their Boston location. Maria Santos, former HR assistant, now listed as terminated personal reasons. 3 women in 2 years, all moved out of Kyle's direct sphere of influence after extended coaching sessions. Either Kyle was the most effective management trainer in corporate history, or he was running a systematic operation that would make a mob boss proud. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Working from home today. Kyle called a department meeting for this afternoon. I have to go in." I stared at the message, my jaw clenching. The bastard was moving fast, probably trying to establish the new normal before I could cause more trouble. But he'd made a mistake by giving me time to prepare. I spent the next hour diving deeper into TechFlow's email system. Kyle was careful. No smoking guns in his official correspondence, no explicit threats or demands. But he'd made the classic predator's error of assuming his victims wouldn't compare notes. I found a pattern in his communication style. With male employees, Kyle was direct and professional. With female employees, especially younger ones, his tone was different. More personal questions, comments about appearance, suggestions for career development. Meetings outside the office. The language was carefully crafted to seem supportive while establishing a relationship dynamic that had nothing to do with work. But the real breakthrough came when I accessed the company's phone records. Kyle had been making calls to a number registered to a private investigation firm in Portland. The call started 3 months ago and occurred every few weeks, always lasting less than 5 minutes. Someone was conducting background checks or surveillance, and I had a sick feeling I knew who the targets were. I called the PI firm, claiming to be a potential client interested in their services. The receptionist was helpful, explaining that they specialized in discrete personal and professional investigations. When I mentioned Kyle's name as a reference, she immediately transferred me to the owner. "Mr. Harlan," the voice was gravelly, professional. "Kyle mentioned you might be calling. What kind of assistance do you need?" I hung up without answering. Kyle wasn't just harassing his employees, he was having them investigated. Financial records, personal relationships, family situations. He was building leverage, finding pressure points he could exploit. My hands were shaking with rage as I pulled up Sarah's personnel file. Sure enough, Kyle had accessed it 17 times in the past 6 months, far more than any legitimate business purpose would require. He knew about Maya's college applications, our mortgage payments, my business loan. He'd studied our vulnerabilities like a general planning a siege. The workshop door chimed, and I looked up to see my old friend Leo Brooks walking in. Leo was ex-military police, now running a small security consulting business. We'd known each other since high school, and he was one of the few people in town who understood that sometimes the law wasn't enough to stop predators. "Sarah called me," Leo said without preamble. "Said you might need some backup." I filled him in on what I'd discovered, watching his expression grow darker with each detail. Leo had daughters of his own, and he'd seen enough during his military service to recognize a predator's pattern. "This guy's a professional," Leo said when I finished. "The PI firm, the careful documentation, the systematic targeting. He's done this before, probably for years. Can we prove it? In court? Maybe, with enough time and resources. But guys like this don't usually see the inside of a courtroom. They have lawyers, connections, money to make problems disappear." I leaned back in my chair, frustrated. "So what do you suggest?" Leo smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We make him the problem that needs to disappear." He pulled out his phone and showed me a contact list. "I know people, Jack. Former cops, investigators, journalists who specialize in corporate corruption. We build a case that's so airtight and so public that Kyle's connections won't matter. That could take months. The thorough approach, yeah, but there's another way." Leo's expression was serious. "We force his hand. Make him do something stupid, something that exposes him completely." I thought about Sarah, about the fear in her eyes, about the weekend trip to Portland that Kyle was expecting her to take. "What did you have in mind?" "We give him what he wants," Leo said, "but we control the circumstances. Sarah goes on the business trip, but she's not alone. We document everything, get him on record making demands, then we destroy him with his own words." It was risky, potentially dangerous, and it required Sarah to put herself in harm's way one more time. But it was also the fastest way to get the evidence we needed to stop Kyle permanently. "I'll talk to her," I said. Leo nodded. "In the meantime, I'll reach out to my contacts. If Kyle's been doing this for years, there are probably other victims willing to come forward once they know they're not alone." After Leo left, I sat in my workshop staring at the evidence I'd compiled. Spreadsheets full of meeting times, email patterns, personnel actions that painted a picture of systematic abuse. But it was all circumstantial, the kind of evidence that a good lawyer could explain away or discredit. I needed something definitive, something that would destroy Kyle's credibility so completely that his connections wouldn't matter, and I was beginning to form an idea of how to get it. My phone rang, Sarah's number. "Jack," her voice was tight with stress. "The meeting's been moved to Kyle's office. Private discussion about my transition plan. He wants to see me in 20 minutes. "Don't go alone," I said immediately. "I have to." He made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. She paused. "Jack, I'm scared." "Listen to me," I said, already moving toward my car. "Keep your phone on. I'm going to call you in exactly 30 minutes. If you don't answer, I'm coming in." "What if he—" "He won't," I interrupted, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Kyle's a coward who hides behind power and position. Cowards don't take risks when they think they're winning. But as I drove toward TechFlow's office building, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kyle was more dangerous than I'd initially realized. Predators who operated for years without consequence developed a sense of invincibility, and invincible men were capable of anything. I parked across the street from TechFlow's building, close enough to see the entrance, but far enough away to avoid the security cameras. The building was a modern glass and steel structure that the city council had fast-tracked through approval when TechFlow announced they were bringing 200 jobs to Millfield. Now it felt like a fortress where my wife was trapped with a predator. 28 minutes after Sarah had gone inside, I called her number. It went straight to voicemail. I waited another 2 minutes, then called again. Still voicemail. That's when I saw Kyle's Tesla pulling out of the parking garage. He was alone, driving fast, and he looked agitated, even from a distance. Sarah's car was still in the lot. I ran across the street and into the building lobby. The security guard, a guy named Pete, who I'd helped set up his home network last year, looked up in surprise. "Hey, Jack, you here to see Sarah?" "Yeah, is she still upstairs?" "Far as I know, Mr. Mercer left in a hurry about 5 minutes ago. Looked like someone had lit a fire under him." I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, my heart pounding. Sarah's office was empty, but her purse was still on her desk, and her computer was logged in. I found her in the women's restroom, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at her phone. "Sarah?" I knelt beside her. "What happened?" She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not fear, but cold, calculating anger. "He recorded it," she said quietly. "Recorded what?" "Everything. Our conversation last night, your threats, my reaction. He had some kind of device in his office. He played it back for me, said it was insurance against any misunderstandings about our professional relationship. I felt my stomach drop. He was recording his own conversations? Not just ours. He showed me files, Jack. Audio recordings of meetings with other women, video from the conference rooms, documentation of every interaction. He's been building a library. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Kyle wasn't just a predator, he was a predator who documented his crimes. Either he was incredibly stupid or incredibly confident that his evidence would never see the light of day. There's more, Sarah continued. He knows about your access to the company systems. He's been monitoring the network logs, tracking every file you've accessed, every search you've run. He said he has enough to file criminal charges for unauthorized access and corporate espionage. I sat down beside her on the bathroom floor, my mind racing. Kyle had been playing chess while I was playing checkers, anticipating my moves and preparing countermeasures. But there was something about his behavior that didn't make sense. If he has all this evidence against me, why hasn't he used it? Because he wants something more than just getting rid of you, Sarah said. He wants complete control. He offered me a deal. What kind of deal? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I go on the Portland trip, no questions asked, no resistance. In exchange, he destroys the recordings of our conversation and overlooks your network intrusions. He said it was a one-time offer. I stared at the white tile wall, trying to process what Kyle was really proposing. He wasn't just demanding compliance, he was demanding capitulation. Total surrender from both of us, with the implicit understanding that this wouldn't be the last demand. There's something else, Sarah said. When he was showing me the files, I saw names. Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Chen, Maria Santos, all the women who were transferred or left the company. He has recordings of them, too. Jesus. He's been doing this for years, Jack, and he's been documenting everything, probably as insurance against anyone who might try to expose him later. I stood up, pacing the small bathroom. We need to get those files. How? He keeps everything on a private server, not connected to the company network, and after today he'll be watching for any sign that we're not playing along. I stopped pacing as an idea began to form. What if we were playing along? Sarah looked at me skeptically. What do you mean? Kyle thinks he's won. He thinks he has us cornered with no options except to give him what he wants. But what if we use that confidence against him? I pulled out my phone and called Leo. I need you to meet us at the house and bring your recording equipment. An hour later, the three of us were sitting around my kitchen table, planning what Leo cheerfully described as the most elaborate sting operation ever attempted by amateurs. The key is making Kyle think he's in complete control, Leo explained. Sarah goes on the Portland trip, but she's wired for sound and video. We document everything he says and does, then we use his own evidence collection against him. What about the files he has on all of us? Sarah asked. That's where Jack comes in, Leo said. While Kyle's in Portland thinking he's finally gotten what he wants, Jack breaks into his private server and copies everything. Not just the files about you, but everything. All the recordings, all the evidence of what he's done to other women. I shook my head. Breaking into his server would be a felony, real prison time if I get caught. Not breaking in, Leo corrected. Social engineering. Kyle's going to be distracted, overconfident, probably drinking to celebrate his victory. That's when people make mistakes with passwords and security protocols. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. This is insane. We're talking about deliberately walking into a trap, hoping we can spring a bigger trap on him. Do you have a better idea? I asked. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. We spent the next 2 hours working out details. Leo had contacts who could provide professional-grade recording equipment, small enough to be concealed but powerful enough to capture clear audio and video. I would use Kyle's absence to attempt accessing his private files, looking for any security vulnerabilities I could exploit remotely. What happens after we get the evidence? Sarah asked. We go public, Leo said. Not just to the police, but to the media, the other victims, Kyle's ex-wives, anyone who might have information. We make this so big and so public that it can't be covered up or explained away. And if it doesn't work, if Kyle's connections are strong enough to protect him? Leo's expression was grim. Then we move to Plan B. Which is? You don't want to know. That evening, Sarah called Kyle and told him she'd accept his terms for the Portland trip. He was gracious in victory, even suggesting a specific hotel and restaurant for their business dinner. His confidence was absolute, which made me wonder how many other women had made similar calls over the years. After Sarah hung up, we sat together on the couch, not talking, just holding hands and trying to prepare ourselves for what was coming. Maya was at her friend's house for the weekend, which was probably for the best. She didn't need to see her parents planning something that could destroy our family if it went wrong. Jack, Sarah said quietly, what if this changes everything between us? What if we can't go back to being the people we were before all this started? I thought about that question for a long time. The truth was, we probably couldn't go back. The trust and innocence that had defined our marriage for 15 years was already gone, replaced by something harder and more complicated. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Then we become different people, I said. People who fight back, people who don't let predators win. Sarah nodded, squeezing my hand. I love you, Jack. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. I love you too, I said. And after this weekend, Kyle Mercer is going to wish he'd never heard our names. 2 days later, Sarah left for Portland with a smile on her face and recording devices hidden in her clothing. Kyle picked her up at the office, playing the part of the gracious boss taking a valued employee on an important business trip. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed the performance myself. As soon as they were gone, I drove to Kyle's condo building and began the most important hack of my life. Kyle lived in Harbor View condominiums, one of those luxury developments that had sprung up during Millfield's brief economic boom. The building had decent security, keycard access, cameras in the lobby, a doorman who actually paid attention. But security systems were just computers, and computers were my specialty. I'd spent the previous day researching the building's network infrastructure. Harborview used a company called SecureNet for their internet and security services, and I'd done contract work for SecureNet 2 years earlier. More importantly, I still had contact information for their lead technician, a guy named Danny, who owed me a favor. Jack, what's up? Danny answered on the second ring. Hey, Danny, I need a small favor. I've got a client in Harborview who's locked out of his home network, and I need to do some remote troubleshooting. Can you give me guest access to the building's Wi-Fi? Sure, no problem. What's the unit number? I gave him Kyle's address, and within 5 minutes I had network credentials that would let me connect to the building's internet system. It wasn't the same as being inside Kyle's personal network, but it was a start. I parked in the visitor lot and opened my laptop. Harborview's Wi-Fi was well configured, but like most residential networks, it had been designed for convenience rather than security. I ran a network scan and immediately found dozens of connected devices. Smart TVs, tablets, phones, security cameras, even a few IoT devices like smart thermostats and door locks. Kyle's condo was Unit 4B, and the network map showed 7 devices registered to that address. 2 computers, a tablet, a smart TV, a security system, and something labeled NAS-KM01 that made my pulse quicken. NAS stood for Network Attached Storage, exactly the kind of device someone would use to maintain a private file server. The NAS was connected to Kyle's home network, which meant it was accessible from his other devices. If I could find a way into any of those devices, I might be able to reach the storage system where Kyle kept his files. I started with a smart TV. Consumer electronics were notoriously insecure, often shipped with default passwords and minimal encryption. Kyle's TV was a high-end Samsung model, probably expensive enough to make him feel sophisticated while being dumb enough to leave security holes you could drive a truck through. 20 minutes of probing found the vulnerability I needed. The TV's firmware had a known exploit that allowed remote access through the media streaming protocol. I uploaded a small program that gave me a foothold inside Kyle's network, then began mapping the internal connections. The NAS device was password protected, but it was also configured to allow automatic backups from Kyle's laptop and desktop computer. If I could access one of those machines, I could potentially use the existing backup connection to reach the storage system. Kyle's laptop was the easier target. Like most people, he'd probably configured it to automatically connect to his home network and sync files in the background. I found the laptop's network signature and began probing for open services. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Kyle had remote desktop access enabled on his laptop, probably so he could work from home when needed. The connection was protected by a username and password, but it was also configured to allow connections from any device on the local network, including the smart TV I'd already compromised. I spent the next hour carefully navigating Kyle's laptop remotely, trying to avoid triggering any security alerts while searching for the files Sarah had described. Kyle was organized. I had to give him that. His desktop had folders labeled by year, then subdivided by employee names. My hands were shaking as I opened the folder labeled Sarah Harlan, 2023. The contents made me physically sick. Audio recordings of every conversation Kyle had had with Sarah, including some I didn't even know about. Photos taken with a telephoto lens of Sarah entering and leaving the building, time-stamped and cataloged. Copies of her personnel file, her credit report, even our mortgage application from 3 years ago. But it was the video files that made me understand the true scope of Kyle's operation. Hidden cameras in his office, in the conference rooms, even in the parking garage. Hours of footage showing Kyle's interactions with female employees, carefully edited and annotated with notes about leverage potential and compliance indicators. I found folders for Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Chen, Maria Santos, and 8 other women whose names I didn't recognize. Some folders contained dozens of files spanning multiple years. Kyle hadn't just been documenting his current victims, he'd been building a comprehensive archive of every woman he'd targeted. The scope of it was staggering. Kyle had been running a systematic campaign of harassment and blackmail for at least 5 years, possibly longer. He'd driven women out of their jobs, destroyed careers, and traumatized dozens of victims, all while maintaining his position as a respected business leader. But as horrifying as the files were, they were also exactly what we needed to destroy him. Kyle had documented his own crimes in meticulous detail, probably thinking the evidence would protect him by ensuring his victims' silence. Instead, he'd created a comprehensive case for the prosecution. I began copying everything to an encrypted external drive, a process that would take several hours given the size of Kyle's archive. While the files transferred, I used Kyle's laptop to access his email and calendar systems. Kyle's email revealed the true extent of his network of enablers. Messages to and from the private investigation firm, discussing background checks and surveillance of specific employees. Correspondence with HR personnel at TechFlow, including Sarah's friend Steph, who had been providing Kyle with confidential personnel information. But the most damning evidence was in Kyle's sent folder, emails to other executives at TechFlow and partner companies sharing performance evaluations of female employees that were clearly based on their willingness to tolerate Kyle's advances rather than their actual work quality. One email sent to a VP at a partner company included the phrase, "Jennifer Walsh is available for transfer to your Portland office. She's very motivated to relocate and won't cause any HR issues. I can personally vouch for her flexibility and discretion." Kyle wasn't just abusing women within his own company. He was trafficking them to other predators in his network. The conspiracy was larger and more organized than I'd imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Package delivered safely. Recipient seems very confident about tonight's entertainment." That was code, meaning Sarah had arrived in Portland and Kyle was proceeding with his plans. The recording equipment Leo had provided would capture everything that happened in the hotel, but I knew Sarah was taking an enormous risk. Kyle had become increasingly bold over the years, and there was no telling how far he might go when he thought he had complete control. I redoubled my efforts to copy Kyle's files, knowing that the evidence I was gathering might be the only thing standing between my wife and a predator who had years of experience silencing his victims. As the files continued transferring, I explored deeper into Kyle's system and found something that made my blood run cold. A folder labeled Insurance contained copies of every email I'd sent for the past 6 months, logs of my network access at TechFlow, and a detailed dossier on my business clients and financial situation. Kyle hadn't just been monitoring Sarah. He'd been investigating me as well, building a case for corporate espionage charges that could put me in prison for years. He'd been planning this confrontation long before Sarah came home with her promotion, laying groundwork to destroy anyone who might threaten his operation. But Kyle had made one critical error. In documenting his surveillance of me, he'd also documented his own illegal activities. The files showed that he'd been using TechFlow's resources to conduct personal investigations, accessing employee records without authorization, and coordinating with outside parties to gather information on company personnel. More importantly, the timestamps on Kyle's files proved that his surveillance had begun months before I'd accessed any TechFlow systems. Kyle had been the aggressor from the beginning, targeting my family and building leverage against us as part of his systematic campaign against Sarah. The file transfer completed just as my phone rang. Sarah's number. "Jack?" Her voice was barely a whisper, and I could hear music and conversation in the background. "Are you okay? We're at dinner. He's been drinking? A lot. And he's getting more aggressive. I don't think I can do this." "Yes, you can," I said firmly. "You're stronger than he is, and you're not alone. Is the equipment working?" "I think so. But Jack, he's talking about going back to his room after dinner. He says he has champagne and wants to celebrate my new position properly." I closed my eyes, fighting down a wave of rage and fear. "Do you feel like you're in immediate danger?" "Not yet, but..." She was quiet for a moment. He showed me photos on his phone, pictures of other women, Jack. He said they all came around eventually, and that I would too. "Listen to me," I said. "If you feel unsafe at any point, you get out of there. Forget the plan, forget the evidence, just get somewhere public and call 911. What about the files? Did you find them? I looked at my laptop screen, showing terabytes of evidence that would destroy Kyle's life and expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond TechFlow. I found everything, I said. More than we ever imagined. Sarah, what Kyle's been doing? It's bigger than just harassment. He's been running a criminal organization. What do you mean? I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to focus on staying safe. Can you do that? I think so. Her voice was stronger now. Jack, I love you. I love you too. And tomorrow, Kyle Mercer is going to learn what happens when he threatens our family. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my car staring at the external drive containing Kyle's files. I had enough evidence to destroy him, but I also knew that powerful men with connections didn't go down easily. Kyle would have lawyers, allies, people who would try to discredit the evidence or claim it had been obtained illegally. I needed to make sure that when Kyle fell, he fell so hard and so publicly that no amount of money or influence could save him. I started the car and drove toward downtown Millfield, where the real work was about to begin. By the time I reached my workshop, it was nearly midnight. I had maybe 6 hours before Kyle and Sarah returned from Portland, 6 hours to turn Kyle's own evidence into a weapon that would destroy him completely. I called Leo first. How's our girl doing? Last check-in was an hour ago. She's back in her hotel room, alone. Kyle tried to follow her upstairs, but she convinced him she needed to freshen up first. She's locked in the bathroom right now, and I've got a contact in Portland PD on standby if she needs immediate extraction. Good. I've got the files, all of them. Leo, this is bigger than we thought. I spent the next 20 minutes briefing Leo on what I'd discovered. The systematic targeting of multiple victims, the network of enablers at TechFlow and other companies, the years of documentation that Kyle had accumulated. Leo listened without interruption, his military training helping him process the tactical implications. So, we've got evidence of federal crimes, Leo said when I finished. Wire fraud, conspiracy, possibly RICO violations if the network is extensive enough. This isn't just a harassment case anymore, it's organized criminal activity. Which means we can't just hand this over to local police and hope for the best. Kyle has too many connections in Millfield. Agreed. We need to go federal, and we need to go public simultaneously. Make this so big that it can't be buried or plea bargained away. I opened my laptop and began organizing Kyle's files into categories. Evidence of crimes against specific victims, documentation of the broader conspiracy, financial records showing misuse of corporate resources, and communications with other perpetrators and enablers. I'm going to need help, I told Leo. This is too much for one person to process and distribute effectively. I've got contacts, Leo said. Investigative journalists, federal agents, victims' rights advocates, people who know how to handle this kind of evidence and make sure it gets the attention it deserves. While Leo made calls, I worked on creating multiple copies of the evidence, stored on different systems and formatted for different audiences. Law enforcement would need the raw files with metadata intact. Journalists would need summaries and context. Victims would need proof that they weren't alone and that their experiences were part of a documented pattern. At 2 a.m., Leo arrived at my workshop with 2 other people. The first was a woman named Janet Morrison, an investigative reporter for the Portland Press-Herald who specialized in corporate corruption. The second was Agent David Kim from the FBI's white-collar crime unit, who'd driven up from Boston after Leo's call. Mr. Harlan, Agent Kim said, settling into a chair across from my desk. Leo's given me a preliminary briefing, but I need to understand exactly how you obtained this evidence. I explained my network access to TechFlow, my discovery of Kyle's surveillance activities, and my decision to investigate further when I realized my wife was being targeted. Agent Kim took notes, occasionally asking technical questions about network security and data recovery. The evidence you've described would normally be inadmissible due to the unauthorized access, Kim said when I finished. However, if we can establish that Kyle was conducting illegal surveillance first, and that your actions were defensive in nature, we might have a viable case. Janet Morrison had been reviewing the files while Kim and I talked. Her expression grew darker with each folder she opened. This is a Pulitzer Prize-winning story, she said quietly. But it's also the kind of story that destroys lives and brings down entire companies. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I thought about Sarah, locked in a hotel bathroom in Portland, afraid and alone because a predator had decided she was his next victim. I thought about Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Chen, Maria Santos, and all the other women whose lives Kyle had damaged or destroyed. I thought about the culture of fear and silence that had allowed Kyle to operate for years without consequences. I'm prepared for justice, I said. We worked through the night, organizing evidence and planning a coordinated release strategy. Agent Kim would present the case to federal prosecutors and request immediate arrest warrants. Janet would prepare a comprehensive expose for publication in multiple newspapers. Leo would coordinate with victim advocacy groups to provide support for the women who would inevitably come forward once the story broke. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. Sarah. Jack, we're leaving Portland now. Kyle seems different this morning. Angry, suspicious. He keeps asking me questions about you, about what we might have discussed. Did something happen last night? He tried to get into my room around 2 a.m., said he'd forgotten something and needed to retrieve some documents. I didn't let him in, told him I was already asleep, but he stood outside my door for almost 10 minutes. I felt a chill. Kyle's behavior suggested he suspected something, which made Sarah's return trip potentially dangerous. Are you in the car with him now? Yes, but I'm pretending to sleep. Jack, I recorded everything last night. The dinner conversation, his attempt to get into my room, even some of what he said in the hallway. It's all on the devices Leo gave me. Good girl, just keep playing along for a few more hours. When you get back to Millfield, go straight to the police station. Don't go home, don't go to work. Just go directly to the station and ask for Detective Morrison. What about Kyle? Kyle's about to have the worst day of his life. Sarah's breath caught. Jack, I'm scared. What if he figures it out before we get back? What if he's listening right now? He's not. Leo's equipment includes counter-surveillance detection. If Kyle had any monitoring tech active in that car, your phone would have vibrated 3 times when you called me. It didn't, which means you're clear. I kept my voice calm, steady. How far out are you? Maybe 90 minutes. We stopped for gas about 20 minutes ago. Kyle's been quiet most of the drive, just making phone calls. Business stuff, I think. Or damage control, I said. He might already know something's wrong. Stay alert, but don't change your behavior. If he asks you anything, stick to your cover story. You're tired from the conference, you had too much wine at dinner. You just want to get home and sleep. Okay. Her voice was small, vulnerable. Jack, when this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about why you didn't tell me what was happening 6 months ago. But right now, I just need you to focus on getting home safe. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. I thought I could handle it myself. I thought if I just kept my head down and did good work, he'd lose interest. That's not how predators work, Sarah. They don't lose interest. They escalate. I pulled into our driveway, killed the engine. But we'll deal with that later. Right now, I need you to promise me something. What? If Kyle tries anything at all, you cause a scene. Scream, call 911, get out of that car and run. Don't worry about being polite or professional or making things awkward. Your safety is the only thing that matters. I promise. Text me when you're 30 minutes out. I'll meet you at the station. At 8 a.m., Agent Kim received authorization to execute arrest warrants for Kyle Mercer and 3 other individuals named in the evidence, including Steph from TechFlow's HR department. Janet Morrison's story was scheduled to publish online at noon, with print editions hitting newsstands the following morning. I drove home to shower and change clothes, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. Within hours, Millfield would be crawling with federal agents, reporters, and lawyers. TechFlow would probably shut down temporarily while investigators combed through their records. The quiet life Sarah and I had built over 15 years was about to explode into very public chaos. But as I stood in my shower, letting hot water wash away the exhaustion and stress of the past week, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of a job well done. Kyle Mercer had thought he was untouchable, protected by money and connections and the silence of his victims. He was about to learn that predators were only as powerful as the systems that enabled them, and those systems could be hacked just like any other network. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Package delivered, subject in custody, secondary targets being rounded up now? I smiled, finished my shower, and got dressed. It was time to go collect my wife. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in Detective Morrison's office when my phone rang. Sarah. Jack, something's wrong. Kyle just got a phone call and his whole face changed. He's driving faster and he keeps looking at me in the rearview mirror. Where are you? About 15 minutes outside Millfield. We're on Route 7, passing the old mill. I looked at Morrison, who was already picking up her radio. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. In about 3 miles, there's a gas station on the right side. Tell Kyle you need to use the bathroom. Tell him it's an emergency. Food poisoning, whatever. Just get him to stop. He won't. Make him stop, Sarah. Cry if you have to. Double over like you're going to be sick. But get out of that car. Morrison was already coordinating with patrol units in the area. 2 cruisers were being diverted to Route 7. Okay, Sarah whispered. Okay, I see the gas station. I'm going to... Oh God, Jack, he's speeding up. He's not stopping. Sarah, he knows. Jack, he knows. He just said, you think you're clever, don't you? You think your husband is going to save you? My blood went cold. Morrison was already heading for the door, motioning for me to follow. Stay on the phone with me, I said, running for Morrison's cruiser. Do not hang up. Sarah, can you open the door? We're going 70 miles an hour. The child locks, I said. Check the child locks. Can you open the door? I heard her trying, heard Kyle's voice in the background. You're not going anywhere. We're going to have a conversation about loyalty, Sarah. About what happens to people who betray me. Morrison hit the lights and sirens, rocketing out of the parking lot. I was gripping the door handle, my phone pressed against my ear, listening to my wife's panicked breathing and Kyle's escalating threats. Sarah, the patrol cars are coming. Just hold on. 2 minutes. Can you hold on for 2 minutes? Jack, her voice broke. He's got a gun. Kyle has a gun. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Package delivered, subject in custody, secondary targets being rounded up now. I smiled, finished my shower, and got dressed. It was time to go collect my wife. I arrived at the Millfield police station just as Sarah's car pulled into the parking lot. Kyle was driving, his face grim and focused, completely unaware that federal agents were waiting inside the building. Sarah caught my eye through the passenger window and gave an almost imperceptible nod. She was okay, and the recording equipment had done its job. Kyle parked and got out of the car, straightening his tie in a gesture that had probably made him feel powerful for years. Today, it just made him look like a man trying to maintain dignity he'd lost long ago. Sarah, he said as she gathered her purse, I'll expect your report on our Portland discussions by end of business today. We have a lot of exciting initiatives to implement. Of course, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured. I'll get started on that right away. Kyle nodded, satisfied that he'd maintained control of the situation, and walked toward his Tesla. He never made it to the driver's door. Kyle Mercer? Agent Kim stepped out from behind a police cruiser, flanked by 2 other federal agents. FBE, you're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and violation of federal civil rights statutes. Kyle's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a calculating look as his lawyer's brain kicked into gear. There's been some mistake. I'm a vice president at TechFlow Solutions, and I demand to speak with my attorney. You'll have that opportunity, Agent Kim said calmly, producing handcuffs. But first, you're coming with us. As Kyle was read his rights and loaded into the back of a federal vehicle, I walked over to Sarah. She was standing perfectly still, watching the scene unfold with an expression of profound relief mixed with disbelief. Is it really over? She asked. The criminal case is just beginning, I said, putting my arm around her. But Kyle's power over you, over anyone, is finished. He'll never hurt another woman. We watched as the federal cars pulled away, taking Kyle Mercer toward a future that would include federal prison, asset forfeiture, and the complete destruction of everything he'd built through years of predatory behavior. Detective Morrison, a local cop who'd been coordinating with the federal team, approached us with a tablet. Mrs. Harlan, we'll need you to provide a formal statement about your experiences with Mr. Mercer. We'll also need the recording devices you were carrying. Sarah nodded and began removing the small cameras and microphones that Leo had hidden in her clothing. There's a lot of material on these devices. Kyle documented his own behavior extensively, and he wasn't careful about what he said when he thought he was in control. Over the next 3 hours, Sarah provided a detailed statement to federal investigators while I waited in the lobby. Other women began arriving as news of Kyle's arrest spread. Jennifer Walsh drove up from Portland, Lisa Chen flew in from Boston, and Maria Santos emerged from wherever she'd been hiding since leaving TechFlow. One by one, Kyle's former victims found the courage to tell their stories to investigators who actually listened and believed them. The pattern that emerged was even more damning than Kyle's own documentation had suggested. Years of systematic abuse, threats, and manipulation, all enabled by a network of corporate accomplices who'd prioritize profits over human dignity. At 2 p.m., Janet Morrison's story went live online with the headline, Tech Executive Arrested in Multi-Year Harassment and Blackmail Conspiracy. The article was comprehensive, detailing Kyle's methods, the scope of his operation, and the failure of corporate systems to protect his victims. My phone started ringing immediately, other reporters wanting interviews, lawyers representing potential victims, and TechFlow employees asking if the company would survive the scandal. I turned off the phone and focused on Sarah, who was finally free to tell the truth about what she'd endured. The recording from last night, she told Agent Kim. Kyle admitted to having similar arrangements with women at other companies. He mentioned names, specific incidents, even dollar amounts for settlements that were paid to keep victims quiet. Agent Kim's expression was grim. This investigation is going to expand significantly. We're looking at potential RICO charges, conspiracy across state lines, and possible connections to organized crime. By evening, Kyle's arrest had become national news. TechFlow's stock price collapsed, and the company announced it was cooperating fully with federal investigators. Steph and 2 other HR employees had been arrested as co-conspirators, and search warrants were being executed at multiple locations. Sarah and I drove home as the sun was setting, both of us emotionally exhausted but finally free from the fear that had dominated our lives for months. Maya was waiting for us, having seen the news reports and figured out that her parents had been involved in something much bigger than a workplace dispute. "Mom, Dad," she said as we walked through the front door, "are you okay? The news is saying some pretty crazy stuff about TechFlow and that Kyle guy." Sarah sat down on the couch and pulled Maya close. "We're okay, sweetheart. Better than okay. We're safe now." "What's going to happen to Kyle?" I looked at my daughter, thinking about the world she was growing up in and the lessons she needed to learn about power, justice, and standing up to predators. "Kyle's going to prison," I said, "for a very long time, and every woman he hurt is going to have the chance to see justice done." "Good," Maya said with the moral clarity that only teenagers possess. "People who hurt other people should face consequences." That night, Sarah and I sat on our back porch, holding hands and watching the stars. For the first time in months, Sarah's hands weren't shaking. The fear was gone, replaced by something stronger and more durable. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we rebuild," I said. "Our marriage, our trust, our lives. But we rebuild them as people who know how to fight back." I keep thinking about all the women who came forward today. Jennifer, Lisa, Maria, and the others. They were so brave. "They learned it from you," I said. "You were the first one to stand up to Kyle, the first one to refuse to be silenced. You started something that's going to change everything." 6 months later, Kyle Mercer was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and civil rights violations. The investigation had expanded to include executives at 4 other companies, resulting in additional arrests and the exposure of what federal prosecutors described as a criminal network dedicated to the systematic abuse of female employees. TechFlow was dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay settlements to Kyle's victims. Sarah used her portion of the settlement to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women report workplace harassment and providing legal support for victims of corporate predators. I expanded my digital forensics business, working primarily with law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy groups. The skills I'd used to expose Kyle's crimes proved valuable in other investigations, and I discovered a sense of purpose I'd never found in routine computer repair work. Maya graduated high school with plans to study criminal justice. Inspired by what she'd witnessed during Kyle's investigation and trial, she wanted to become a federal agent, she said, so she could help catch predators who thought they were too powerful to face consequences. As for Kyle himself, he was serving his sentence in a federal facility in Pennsylvania, having lost everything: his job, his money, his freedom, and any pretense of respectability. His ex-wives had filed additional lawsuits, his former colleagues had disavowed him, and his name had become synonymous with corporate predation. The last I heard, he was working in the prison library, probably dreaming of the power he'd once wielded, and wondering how a simple computer repair technician had managed to destroy his carefully constructed empire. But Kyle had never understood the most important truth about power. It's only as strong as the silence that protects it. Once that silence is broken, once victims find their voices and allies find their courage, even the most untouchable predators discover they're just men who can be held accountable like anyone else. Sarah's promotion had lasted exactly 1 day, but